Imagine waking up one day and realizing the walls around you weren't built by your enemies, but by your own thoughts. Not physical walls, of course, no concrete, no bars, no locked doors. Yet you can't move. You can't speak your truth. You can't chase what you love. You can't even breathe without feeling the invisible pressure of everything you should be. This cage doesn't clang shut. It whispers, it persuades, it seduces. And before you ever feel trapped, you've already decorated it, lined the walls with routines, reinforced the bars with beliefs, hung your identity like paintings in a cell you didn't know you were building. You go about your day like nothing is wrong. Coffee, traffic, deadlines, notifications, laughter that sounds more like static. You tell yourself, it's just life. You call it adulthood. You call it being responsible. You call it being realistic. But deep down, in those quiet moments when the world finally shuts up, you hear something else, a knocking, not from outside, from within. What if it's not the world that's holding you back? Not your job, your parents, your partner, or your past? What if the true captor is something far closer, your own thoughts turned inward, looping like an algorithm gone mad? What if every time you whispered, I can't, or I'm not enough, or what will they think, you were adding a new bar to your mental prison? Think about it. When did you last do something reckless but right? When did you speak your mind without rehearsing a safer version first? When did you let yourself want something fully without shrink-wrapping it in logic or fear? You used to be wild. Not the kind of wild that gets drunk or breaks laws, but the kind that dreamed big, that asked why not instead of what if. You questioned everything, and then, slowly, without realizing, you began answering every question with, because that's just the way it is. That phrase is the anthem of the cage. Because that's just the way it is. But who said so? Who decided that failure defines you? Who told you that your dreams are childish? Who convinced you that playing it safe is the noble path? You did, maybe, not consciously. Maybe it was drip-fed over years' school desks, disapproving glances, comparison traps, broken hearts. But at some point, you accepted the script. You internalized the voices, and then, worst of all, you began repeating them to yourself. Imagine standing in front of a mirror. But instead of your reflection, you see every belief you've absorbed. Without questioning. I'm not creative. I'll never make it. I always mess things up. It's too late. People like me don't succeed. I don't deserve more. Look closer. None of those thoughts are you. They're just echoes, ghosts of judgments that you've mistaken for truth. But when did those echoes become the soundtrack of your life? Here's the great question. What if your suffering isn't coming from the world, but from the lens through which you've been taught to see it? A lens so close to your eye, you don't even know it's there. A fish doesn't know it's in water until it's gasping on land. And you don't realize you're caged until someone shows you the lock was never real. This isn't about toxic positivity. It's not a call to just think happy thoughts. That would be another form of denial, another mask. No, the truth is far messier, more raw, because once you realize the cage is made of thoughts, a terrifying freedom appears. If your thoughts built the prison, then they can also tear it down. But are you ready for that? Are you prepared to face the storm that comes when you challenge every story you've ever told yourself? When you stop asking, am I allowed, and start asking, what if the only permission I ever needed was my own? Here's the paradox. Freedom is terrifying. Because once you're free, there's no one left to blame. And so, many of us stay where it's safe in a mental cage that's familiar, predictable, quiet, painful, yes, but at least it's ours. You don't need keys to unlock it. You need truth, the kind of truth that hurts before it heals. The kind of truth that doesn't speak in slogans or promises, but in the still, honest voice that says, you were never stuck, just scared, and that's where we begin. The cage is real, but it's not eternal. The door is there, but it won't swing open on its own. The thoughts are loud, but they aren't your final truth. So let's begin walking toward the part of you that remembers who you were before the world taught you to forget. The cage is cracking. Can you hear it? The most dangerous prisons are not the ones you can see. They are the ones you believe are not prisons at all. You wake up, follow routines, chase productivity, monitor your image, all while obeying thoughts you never truly chose. You think you are steering your life, but underneath the surface, a quiet puppeteer pulls the strings. The voice in your mind that was never yours to begin with. This is the hidden problem, not that we are trapped, but that we mistake the trap for our identity. Carl Jung called it the persona, the mask we wear for the world. In time, we forget it's a mask. We think it's us. We confuse adaptation with authenticity. Jung warned that the more we identify with this external persona, the more we repress the self that lies beneath. And what is repressed does not disappear. It festers. It sabotages. It returns in dreams, in illness, in sudden breakdowns that feel like the world collapsing, when it's really just the weight of years of unlived truth. But why does this happen? Why do we build these cages? Because the human mind is terrified of pain, emotional pain, existential pain. So, from an early age, it builds defenses, beliefs that protect us from rejection, abandonment, and the unbearable chaos of not being in control. The child who hears you're too much learns to become small. The teen who fails publicly learns to never risk again. The adult who's told, grow up, learns to bury their passion in spreadsheets and obligations. And over time, these defenses become unconscious. We no longer say, I act this way because I'm scared. We say, this is just who I am, but it's not. Arthur Schopenhauer believed that much of human suffering stems from the conflict between the will for deep inner force that drives you ascend the intellect, which tries to manage, repress, and rationalize that force into socially acceptable behavior. The will wants freedom, ecstasy, transcendence. The intellect wants approval, safety, predictability, and so we become divided. Nietzsche called this slave morality, a system of internalized control where individuals become their own oppressors by clinging to externally approved virtues, humility, obedience, caution, not because they are inherently noble, but because they keep the peace, even at the cost of one's soul. Think about how society rewards self-abandonment. We applaud those who overwork, who suppress emotion, who perform happiness while quietly unraveling inside. We label authenticity as selfish or immature. We see vulnerability as weakness. We call numbness maturity. The cage is not just personal, it's cultural, and yet, even within a repressive culture, the trap remains psychological. Because even when the external force disappears, the internalized voice stays. You no longer need to be watched. You've learned to watch yourself, Michel. Foucault described this brilliantly in his theory of the panopticana prison design, in which inmates can be observed at any time, but never know when. Over time, they begin to police themselves. There is no need for a guard. The prisoner becomes the guard, And that is the modern mind, always watched, always judged, even when alone. This is why we self-sabotage. This is why we overthink, why we scroll endlessly instead of acting, why we plan more than we create, why we reject love before it can reject us. Because part of us, the truest part, is still alive, still trying to break through. But every time it rises, another voice pushes it down. That's not practical. What will they think? Don't be so dramatic. Who do you think you are? You want to scream, but the walls are padded with polite silence. You want to run, but the path forward looks like madness. You want to live, but you don't know how to ask for permission because no one ever told you you didn't need it. And here lies the deeper philosophical problem. You've mistaken thought for truth, emotion for weakness, control for peace, compliance for love, success for worth. We've all been conditioned to do this because real introspection is dangerous. It threatens the systems we've built. The economy doesn't run on fulfilled people, it runs on anxious ones, on endless craving, on unworthiness dressed up as ambition. Viktor Frankl, the Holocaust survivor and psychiatrist, once wrote, "When a person can't find a deep sense of meaning, they distract themselves with pleasure, and so we numb, we chase, we scroll, we consume, we avoid, not because we are weak, but because we are lost in a mental labyrinth designed to keep us running from ourselves." Here's the truth. Most never hear. There is nothing wrong with you. You are not broken. You are not lazy. You are not weak. You are just trapped in a thought structure built for survival, not for joy. A structure that once protected you, but now confines you. And this is where the great danger lies. You've become loyal to the very thoughts that are killing your spirit. You defend them. You argue for them. You repeat them until they become mantras. I'm too old. I missed my chance. People like me don't get to be free. Each one a bar, each one a nail, each one a belief that was once adaptive, but now obsolete. And what's worse, you believe that if you let go of them, you'll fall apart. But what if the opposite is true? What if letting go isn't the death of who you are, but the birth? What if everything you seek is on the other side of the thoughts you refuse to challenge? Not just thoughts about the world, but thoughts about you, who you are, what you deserve, what you're capable of, what it means to be alive. This is not easy. You will grieve the version of yourself who played by the rules, who stayed safe, who earned the approval of a world that never truly saw them. But in that grief, you'll find the first crack of light, because before you can break out, you must first see the bars, and that begins not with action, but with the courage to ask, what part of me have I silenced in order to be accepted? You move through the world as if you're free. You smile when you're supposed to. You laugh at the right jokes. You make small talk about weather, deadlines, and weekend plans. You say, I'm good, just tired, because anything deeper would make people uncomfortable. You're playing a role you never auditioned for, in a play you don't even remember agreeing to, and yet something inside you knows, that deep, hollow ache that follows you from the boardroom to the bedroom, that strange sense that no matter what you achieve, it still doesn't feel like you arrived, that numbness after victories, that restlessness on quiet nights, that voice that whispers in the shower, there has to be more. These are not random feelings, they are symptoms. They are the invisible bruises left by years of living a life orchestrated by fear-based thoughts. The mind, once a tool for survival, has become the architect of your disconnection, and what it disconnects you from is life itself. This is where the unseen consequences begin. Let's start with relationships. When your thoughts become a prison, you don't just lock yourself inside, you lock other people out. You interact through a filter of past wounds, expectations, and protective masks. You're not loving people for who they are. You're loving them for how well they fit your need to feel safe. You avoid vulnerability because it feels like weakness. You overanalyze every word. You fear being fully seen, so you curate fragments of yourself, hoping someone will love the mask and not notice the silence behind it. And then you wonder why love feels unsatisfying, why intimacy slips away, why even in the arms of another, you still feel profoundly alone. Next, your work. You chase goals you never questioned. You define success by standards you inherited but never examined. You push yourself until you burn out, then shame yourself for not being stronger. The cage whispers, work harder, be more, prove you're enough. You call it ambition, but what if it's just avoidance? What if the career you've built is not a reflection of your purpose, but a distraction from your pain? And let's talk about your body. When the mind is trapped, the body carries the sentence. Tension in your shoulders from unspoken anger, insomnia from racing thoughts, chronic fatigue from emotional suppression, digestive issues from swallowed words and repressed fear, migraines from the mental load of pretending everything is fine. The body doesn't lie. It remembers, it warns, and when we ignore its signals, it begins to scream. Not to punish us, but to wake us. Neurologically. This makes sense. The human brain is wired to form patterns, to protect us from perceived threats. Every time you thought, it's not safe to be myself, or if I fail, I'll be abandoned, the brain recorded it. It built a network. And now, those thought loops fire automatically like a soundtrack on repeat. Long after the original scene ended, these loops don't just affect your mood, they shape your reality. This is what psychologists call confirmation bias. The brain searches for evidence to support the beliefs it already holds. So if you believe you're unworthy, you'll unconsciously interpret every silence, every delay, every sideways glance as proof. You won't see opportunities, you'll see threats. You won't hear praise, you'll hear doubt. You won't take chances, you'll reinforce the walls. And society rewards this. We wear exhaustion like a badge of honor. We glorify productivity while ignoring purpose. We celebrate curated lives on screens while hiding in digital silence. But make no mistake, this is not living. This is a slow erosion of the soul, dressed up as success. Jean-Paul Sartre spoke of bad faith, the act of lying to oneself to avoid the weight of freedom. He warned that we often choose roles, routines, and identities not because they fulfill us, but because they spare us from the terror of choice, from the responsibility of creating meaning, because freedom, real freedom, demands that we confront the chaos of the unknown. And so we settle for careers that numb instead of ignite, for relationships that maintain peace but starve intimacy, for patterns that are familiar but unfulfilling, all while convincing ourselves this is just how life is. But here's the hidden cost. You begin to forget who you were before the fear took over. And once you forget, you stop grieving that loss. And once you stop grieving, you stop reaching. And then, quietly, without ceremony, you become a ghost in your own life, present but not alive, seen but not known, breathing but not feeling. There is a profound loneliness in that. A loneliness that cannot be fixed by company or conversation, only by truth. You see, the thoughts that built your cage were once protective. They were shields against early wounds, necessary adaptations, but you outgrew them. And instead of shedding them, you built your life around them, and now they are crumbling. That's why you feel the restlessness. That's why you wake at 3 a.m., staring at the ceiling, feeling like something vital is missing, but you don't know what. That's why joy feels fleeting, why peace feels earned but never permanent, why the future feels like something you survive, not something you create. Because your life was never meant to be a performance, it was meant to be a becoming. And becoming requires dismantling. You must unlearn the language of self-limitation. You must grieve the years spent behind a mask. You must sit with the pain, not as an enemy, but as a messenger. Because here's the final, brutal truth of this section. If you don't face the cage now, it will become your home, and one day, you'll look back and realize you spent decades decorating it while the door was always open. Rebellion doesn't always look like fire and fury. Sometimes, rebellion is a whisperer, quiet voice that says, no more. No more shrinking, no more explaining, no more rehearsing every word, every dream, every desire to make it digestible. To people who don't understand your hunger, no more, because there comes a moment not dramatic, not cinematic, just honest when you realize that staying in the cage is more painful than risking the escape. But what does rebellion look like? When the bars are made of thought. It starts with doubt, not self-doubt, thought doubt. The radical act of questioning every belief you've ever internalized as absolute truth. The first step to breaking free isn't action, it's awareness. You begin by sitting in silence, not the kind that numbs, but the kind that reveals. You start to listen not to the world, but to the monologue inside your own head. You begin to observe your thoughts as if they weren't yours, because most of them aren't single. This is the ancient practice of metacognition, thinking about thinking. In that simple shift, you move from being a prisoner to becoming the watcher, the observer, the one who sees, and what you see will shock you. You'll notice how often your inner voice speaks in absolutes. I always mess this up. I never get chosen. Nothing ever works out for me. That's not truth. That's trauma with a microphone. The rebellion is calling it out. Every time you hear that voice, you ask, who taught me this? Is it universally true? Just historically familiar? Does this belief liberate me or limit me? And then, slowly, you replace judgment with curiosity. You stop asking, what's wrong with me? And start asking, what happened to me that made me believe this? You stop fearing discomfort and start realizing it's a compass. Because here's the paradox. The path to freedom goes through discomfort, not around it. You must feel what you've numbed. You must name what you've silenced. You must mourn what you pretended didn't matter. That is rebellion. But this isn't just internal. Rebellion shows up in how you live. You stop apologizing for taking up space. You stop contorting yourself to fit in rooms not built for your truth. You stop chasing validation like scraps from a table you weren't meant to sit at. You begin saying no to things that steal your peace, and yes to things that make no logical sense but ignite your soul. You start risking rejection, because being rejected as your true self is less painful than being accepted for a mask. And in this rebellion, something sacred happens. You remember who you were before the world got to you, not in a sentimental, nostalgic way, in a cellular way. in a soul-level way. You start creating, again not for applause, but because your spirit needs to. You speak with less polish, but more power. You take up space in conversations, not to dominate but to exist. You look people in the eye and let them see you, and yes, it's terrifying, but it's also the most alive you've felt in years. You realize that freedom isn't found in external permission, it's found in internal alignment. You start telling the truth. Not the truth that wins arguments, but the truth that sets you on fire. And sometimes the people around you will flinch. They'll ask, "Why are you changing?" They'll say, "You used to be so easygoing, so agreeable." But you'll know the answer. You weren't easygoing. You were disappearing, and now you're not. You're reclaiming yourself, one unspoken boundary at a time. One unchased approval, one dream resurrected from the graveyard of some day. This is not selfish, this is sacred, because every time you liberate yourself from a limiting belief, you don't just change your life, you change the lives of those watching you. You become evidence, proof that another way is possible. You create a ripple. Think of the people you admire most, not for their success, but for their realness. The ones who speak with depth, who live with conviction, who carry scars but don't let the scars define them. They weren't born that way. They chose it. They fought for it. You must too, because the cage doesn't just fall apart. It resists. It tests you. It sends whispers. They'll leave you if you change. You'll fail. You'll regret this. That voice isn't your enemy. It's a final test. And your rebellion is not to silence it, but to walk anyway, to act despite it, to trust the unknown more than the familiar pain, to choose alignment over approval, to bet on yourself. And here's the miracle no one talks about. Once you take the first steps toward truth, the cage stops looking like protection and starts looking like what it always was, a tomb, and you will run from it like your life depends on it, because it does. This rebellion is not loud. It's not on banners or shouted in crowds. It's a quiet revolution in the soul, and every act of honesty is a hammer. Every boundary drawn is a crack in the wall. Every dream chased is a swing at the lock. And one day you'll stand where the bars once were, holding pieces of your former prison in your hand. And you'll smile, not because you're done, but because you finally began. At first, freedom feels disorienting. You step out of the cage, but the room is too bright. You flinch at your own reflection. You look down at your hands and don't recognize the fingerprints. They belonged to someone who was always adapting, always surviving, always editing themselves to be digestible. And now you're standing in the open. Nothing to hide behind, nothing to perform. No rules left except the ones you choose to believe. And for a moment, the silence is terrifying, because you expected freedom to feel like flight, but it feels like falling. And this, right here, is the final trap. You think something is wrong because you feel afraid. But the truth is, that fear is not a warning, it's a birth cry. You're not dying, you're waking up. You are not meant to feel safe when you first reclaim your mind. You are meant to feel new, exposed, vulnerable, unfamiliar even to yourself, because for years you lived in echo chambers made of survival, not truth, and now the echoes are gone. What remains is you, but not the you the world taught, not the you who excelled by obeying, not the you who fit in by disappearing, not the you who wore ambition like armor or shame like skin. What remains is something quieter, deeper, Older, it is the you before the world broke you into pieces and praised you for staying. Shattered, it is the you that existed before language, before roles, before the guilt and performance and unconscious loyalty to pain. It is the child that dared to dream before dreams became impractical. The teenager that still believed in magic before real life choked it out. The artist before the algorithm, the lover before betrayal, the soul before the system. And here's the ultimate truth, the one that shatters every illusion. You were never the cage. You were the light trapped inside it, that voice of self-doubt, not yours, that fear of failure, not yours, that guilt for wanting more, not yours. They were all inherited, from a society built on scarcity, from generations that never healed, from institutions that needed you obedient, from parents doing their best, but passing down their pain like heirlooms. And once you see this, really see it, something irreversible happens. You stop fighting yourself. You stop trying to fix a soul that was never broken. You stop chasing worth like a starving dog under a table. You stop building futures from a place of fear. You realize that the problem was never your ambition or your passion or your voice. The problem was the lie that told you those things made you unlovable. And so you start again, not by becoming someone new, but by returning to who you were before the forgetting. You write not to be read, but to remember. You speak not to impress, but to connect. You love not to be chosen, but because you choose. You create not for validation, but because your hands were made to shape the invisible, and something miraculous begins to unfold. Your presence becomes louder than your performance. Your silence becomes more powerful than your shouting. Your being becomes your revolution. People notice. Some will say you've changed. Some will say you're selfish now. Some will leave. Let them, because the truth is, they were never really with you. They were with your mask. And now that the mask is gone, the people who truly see you will emerge. The real ones, the ones who don't need you to be smaller to feel big, who don't need you to be agreeable to be lovable, who don't flinch at your truth, but lean in closer. They will not rescue you, because you've already rescued yourself. And this is where everything begins to bloom. Your mind becomes a garden, not a courtroom. Your past becomes a story, not a sentence. Your future becomes a canvas, not a punishment. Your thoughts become tools, not tyrants. You realize something so simple, it almost feels like a joke. You are allowed to be free, not because you earned it. Not because someone finally gave you permission, but because freedom is your birthright. And when that sinks in, not intellectually, but viscerally, it breaks something open in you. Not pain, not sadness, but joy. The kind of joy that doesn't need a reason. The kind of joy that rises up in your chest when you remember, I'm still here. And you laugh, not because everything is perfect, but because, for the first time, you are not complete, not finished, but true. And that is more than enough. You stand where the cage once was, no longer needing to fight it because it was never solid. It was always made of thought, of stories, of assumptions. And now they are ash. The only thing left is what was. Always there beneath it, you. The world may still try to pull you back. Old patterns will whisper. The familiar pain may visit like an old friend, asking to stay. But you know now, you've seen too much. You've felt too much, and there is no going back, because once you realize the cage was never locked once, you feel the wind on your skin and hear your own voice without distortion. You become something terrifying to a world built on fear. You become free, and a free mind is the most powerful force on earth. So go, not to escape, but to return to yourself, to the quiet knowing, to the wild hunger, to the sacred aliveness that was never lost, only buried, because, in the end, the only thing stronger than the thoughts that caged you is the truth that waited patiently for you to remember. You were never the prisoner. You were the key.